Great. So we have one last item on the agenda, and then we'll break you free. But this is a very valuable one to talk about. Actually, it's a great pleasure and honor to welcome Bruce Coppock, who is going to tell you his story more in detail than I would do. If anything, I was humbled to contribute to his care, even though I have admittedly did not much, short of visits to New York, where I just gave all the support and the moral support, rather, and chatted about Beirut, where he was born. But please, Bruce, you can tell us more about your story.
I won't keep you long because I know it's been a very long day. I just have to find my... I just assume I go forward. Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here. I've recently retired from a career in the classical music world, in which I spent 35 years dealing with world-famous conductors, soloists, as chief executive of the St. Louis Symphony, and then later as the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. Let me say up front that I'd feel a lot more comfortable giving bad news to any one of those conductors than to be here as a civilian in the context of such a high-level discussion with such a distinguished group. It's challenging, to say the least, so I apologize in advance for the primitive nature of my exhibits and my feeble attempts at terminology. Let's see, what do I do here? They didn't give me any slides. Okay, well, it's self-explanatory. It doesn't matter. Okay.
Did you have?
I submitted a slide, yeah, but there are only 3, and you guys are conversant with the material, so don't worry about it. No worries. The presentations have been extremely stimulating today, and compared with how empty the quiver seemed in 2008, it feels that the understanding of how to treat cholangiocarcinoma has come quite some distance. But it's very striking to me as a patient how fantastically different our lenses are. Having just entered my 10th year living with this disease, I must say it's deeply humbling to have lasted so long in the context of cholangiocarcinoma's survival rates. I was diagnosed in 2006 with extrahepatic disease, positive proximal and distal margins. 6 regional lymph nodes out of 10 taken shown disease. The journey since then has been transformational and positive in nearly every way. Improvements in my general physical and emotional health, the quality and depth of my family relationships, and until my retirement a month ago, the clarity with which I was able to carry out my duties leading a major cultural institution, I believe were all positively impacted by my journey with this disease. I'm sure that I share with other long-term survivors the special appreciation for the gift of time and the bewilderment of why treatment has worked, given the dismal statistics for the disease. The longer my remission has continued, the harder I fought to put the pieces of the puzzle together to see if there's any learning to be gleaned. This, I hasten to say, is a very high-quality problem. Well, you can't see from the slide, but here's the general outline. Until 2008, my treatment plan was quite standard with radiation, 5-FU, Xeloda, erlotinib, all the standard stuff, and not very successful. But in 2008, I had a major metastasis to my liver, and we decided, Steve Alberts and Greg Gores and I at the Mayo Clinic decided to go on to oxaliplatin with gemcitabine, and I had a long-tail response to that drug, during which my CA19-9 dropped from 1075 to 50, and the tumors on my liver disappeared completely. Since 2009, I've had multiple scans, each showing no evidence of solid tumor. In late 2009, then, I began what is now a 6-year extension of my remission induced by the combination of celecoxib and sorafenib. More on that later. From the beginning, I have aggressively pursued the development of a team of consultants from multiple institutions. Let me be clear, I'm profoundly grateful to and have enormous respect for the 3 or 4 doctors who formed the core of my team, but I feel quite certain that making the intentional choice to be my own medical director led to choices and possibilities that might not have otherwise presented themselves in the normal course of treatment. Early on in this journey, I found inspiration reading Stephen Jay Gould's article with the best title ever, "The Median is Not the Message." I cannot adequately express how wonderful it feels to be in the long tail and how, oh, there we are, great. Well, it just came up here. Now what do I do? It's up, great, so there you go, now you know. I cannot adequately express how wonderful it feels to be in the long tail, and it was heartening to hear Dr. Harding point out how important modest percentage responses are to those of us who fall within them. My family has been extraordinarily engaged and supportive, and I'm preternaturally intense and determined in my approach to things. I'm also congenitally challenged when it comes to accepting conventional wisdom, so I'm sure that I've driven my doctors crazy. My cell biologist brother, recently retired from the NIH, provided important guidance and played a crucial role in helping me develop a diverse and effective team, and most especially connecting me initially with Gregory Gores. Now, I hope if I push a button, I'll get some advancement. What's the magic formula here? Sorry. The big green button, there we go. Great, super. In particular, Dr. Gores and Stephen Albers at the Mayo Clinic, Hassan Abu Alfa at Sloan Kettering, and William Lee at the Angiogenesis Foundation in Boston have thus provided a vital and interactive role in devising my care since 2007. It's fair to say that I've had every possible advantage in this fight. But none of that explains why I've had such an outlier response, not to one, but to two therapies that have failed so many others. Thus, perhaps my case might be interesting to you. Along the way, there have been some inflection points in which I was more or less left on my own to make decisions that have ultimately proved critical to my survival. As I said earlier, following generically successful radiation and 5FU therapy in 2007, I received 4 opposing views on how next to proceed. One from Greg Gores at the Mayo Clinic, one from Bill Jarnigan at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Institute, one from Johns Hopkins, and one from the Virginia Piper Institute in Minneapolis. Counterintuitively, I took Dr. Gores' advice to do nothing for a while, whose admonition that, quote, treating this disease is like flying a plane through fog with no radar, seemed to explain why I got such a wide variety of opinions. This dilemma raises an important question of what the foundation and the medical profession can do to help patients, not the beneficiaries, of such enormous networks of support, and without sufficient means to make such decisions for themselves. I think in particular, the first care decision I had to make for myself when the surgeon proposed by the staff at the community hospital to which I presented myself in St. Paul, turned out to be the same person who had previously performed my vasectomy. It fell to me, not the medical staff, to take the initiative to get myself to a more appropriate medical institution. The need for education by the foundation and greater collaboration by specialty centers with community hospitals in guiding freshly diagnosed patients to centers of excellence seems obvious and of paramount importance. 2008, after my liver metastasized to my liver, following the failure of Gemzar, erlotinib, and Xeloda, I remember feeling completely on my own when Dr. Stephen Alberts at the Mayo recommended that palliation or hospice might be as good an alternative as oxaliplatin, given the expectation of 4 to 6 months life expectancy, and that the rough ride of oxaliplatin and gemcitabine might increase the odds of extending things by a couple months by a mere 15 or 20%. Despite this, there was no question in my mind that I'd pursue the oxali and gemcitabine approach as aggressively as possible. I ended up doing 14 3-week cycles, so a 42-week period on that drug. It was not fun. to learn 4 months on that my scans were completely clean and that my CA19-9 had fallen from the 1075 I mentioned earlier to the mid-50s was exhilarating indeed. A very high threshold for discomfort and a complete unwillingness to quit were powerful allies in making that an easy decision despite the lousy odds. But what was the science behind my unusual response to oxaliplatin? I can't find any literature anywhere on that. We next tried RAD-001, which quickly failed, so I explored many non-mainstream approaches to my case, and most significantly with William Lee at the Angiogenesis Foundation in Cambridge. The conversations with Will and those with Drs. Albert Score and Abu Alpha led to the sorafenib and Celebrex combination. I remember Greg Gores saying, quote, "I think there's something to it." We tried it in 2009 and it's still working. Lucky indeed, but no specific understanding of why. The lack of good data is frustrating. But here's where it gets interesting. In 2014, in what became an inadvertent and very crude field experiment, we learned that celecoxib and sorafenib, together with a common PPI, at least in my case, formed a three-legged stool. 18 months ago, I inadvertently let the PPI lapse, and shortly thereafter, unsurprisingly, found myself in the Mayo Clinic emergency room with bleeding ulcers. The initial perspective was that sorafenib had lost its viability due to its corrosive effects and its efficacy. Celecoxib was frankly discredited vis-a-vis its contribution to the efficacy of the protocol, but also deemed even more responsible for the ulcers than sorafenib. It looked as if my 5-year run was over. We decided to try pazopanib, which to me as a patient felt like a shot in the dark. Providentially, however, Part D denied the insurance, and Dr. Alberts suggested reinstating sorafenib while we appealed the decision. As the CA19-9 began an all too familiar and inexorable rise, rather than switch to pazopanib, which had now been approved following appeal, we decided to test whether the restoration of the three-legged stool of sorafenib, celecoxib, and the PPI would arrest the rise in the marker. In the 6 months on sorafenib alone with the PPI, my CA19-9 had steadily risen from the mid-teens to nearly 200. Interestingly, within 4 months of the restoration of the combination of celecoxib and sorafenib, and with an adequate prophylactic in the form of a doubled PPI, the CA19-9 fell to well within normal range. Getting back to this point required, I can tell you, a lot of tolerance and collaboration on Dr. Albert's part, a lot of analytic persistence on my brother's part, and some blind luck in the form of an insurance denial on the pazopanib. I want to stipulate that I'm endlessly grateful for the team who've led my care. But we understand so little about this combinatorial therapy that has been so dramatically successful in my case and in precious few others. Is it a freak biochemical phenomenon or a genetics question? Does its success suggest future approaches to treatment? It seems to me that these are legitimate questions about how to understand and learn from the cases of outliers. Are there enough resources allocated to research about how outliers respond that we might learn something from these freak cases? For what it's worth, I'm happy in my retirement to offer myself up as a specimen, if that's interesting to any of you. From a patient's perspective, what are the lessons learned? Well, to echo what Dr. Chapman said earlier, I believe passionately that as patients, we have a fundamental responsibility to be activists on our own behalf. We should hold ourselves accountable for learning everything we can, using multiple resources, becoming literate enough about our disease to be able to ask our doctors probing questions, and develop the courage to be the protagonists in our illness, not mere passengers. I have no illusions of having any medical or scientific knowledge, but I can tell you a lot about the length of an eighth note. I do believe it's essential to be aggressively and sufficiently informed to ask lots of questions. And in so doing, to learn to risk the frustration of my doctors, to demand a consultative environment which allows exploration of the cutting edge, and to be an active participant in the decision-making process. So, I hope these vignettes help form our understanding of the complexities of being a patient in the cancer treatment experience, for you as researchers and practitioners, and for us as patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. That was a tour de force and great ending. Thank you. Any question or thoughts? Obviously, it brings a very important point, which is, exactly what we were discussing in the morning, actually, at the Medical Advisory Board, which is, the scientific component of the outliers. And already there has been a little bit of bring up interest in regard to that and the analyses. And actually, there are people doing it in other diseases, so it's not like, a foreign concept per se. And something to understand is that the therapy, the biology, the combination of, there's definitely a lot to kind of learn from, and it's kind of nice that you bring it up in that high level of medical knowledge. So that's definitely extremely helpful. In regard to the other point you bring up, which is about the patient obligations, I can see that you can say that as being part of the patient, part of that argument. It's a little bit difficult for us, but nonetheless, definitely by all means, I have to say your skills are something to stand for. You have the charming effect. And you definitely can make people sit down and listen. And you don't necessarily argue, but you argue later. And that's a skill, by the way. And, patients know how to adapt to, we're all humans. And this is kind of like, I think it's touching on a very, very important note, which is how to gear yourself for a medical negotiation. And this is, it's quite a task. And it seems you are definitely great at. So something you need to dig into as well.
I don't suggest that attitude in a combative way at all. It's the only way that worked for me. And fortunately, I was able to find partners in this who were willing to be iterative with me about it, and who I hope I didn't offend too deeply in the process. But anyway, it's a miracle to be alive, and so I'm grateful to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.